Hello and welcome to an analysis of Chapter 5 of Crow Country by Kate Constable. In this chapter it starts after some time has elapsed from the end of chapter number 4, and it's going to explore a lot about relationships in this chapter. Really, there's a pretty big focus on relationships. Let's see how it opens. We have this quotation here: "Let's treat ourselves for once and have a meal at the pub." Obviously, Ellie's feeling a little bit generous and perhaps like she needs a little bit of a break, but Sadie's reaction is interesting. She looked up suspiciously from her maths homework, wondering if Ellie was trying to soften her up for something. So she never really trusts her mother. There's always that element of suspicion. She's not sure what's motivating her to be so generous or so kind in this way. Moving on. We get this description of how cold it is through the frosty night toward the bright lights of the pub. It's almost as if the pub is this beacon of hope and warmth, and it has all these really positive connotations attached to it. And of course, the pub is the iconic Australian place where people go, particularly in these small townships. Down here we have Sadie clutched a glass, unwilling to leave the protective force field of her mother's presence. Now, previously in the novel, we've had a lot of tension between the characters, and Sadie's quite critical of her mother, but here we can see how she relies on her. She certainly depends on her for protection, and we would expect that in a relationship like this. References to Elton John are great examples of intertextuality, and it gives us a bit of contextual information. So it tells us here are the pop culture references of the time. And it's interesting that it's the younger children listening to these songs, not the older ones. But that might be symbolic of the fact that even tastes in music and what's considered good quality music is passed down from the older generations to the younger ones. And we notice here it describes Sadie in this particular way. Her heart skipped when she noticed Lockie Mortlock leaning on a cue. It's a representation of Sadie's interest in Lockie, and we can see how she has no control over the way she feels about other characters. She is a victim to her emotions. And Sadie reflects as she watches this scene and she looks at the different people around her. This is how she reflects on herself. They were all normal kids. Birds would never talk to them. Sadie wished she was normal. She still feels like an outsider. She still feels like she is othered because of her lack of connection with this place, her lack of importance. And this would be common for teenagers. If we take away people's connection with their friends, and we take away the place that they feel comfortable and do have that sense of belonging, it's difficult to find that again. And it really does a good job of highlighting the conflict that Sadie is facing in having experienced the move out to the country. In this quote here, one of the boys guffawed. It may not be the most important quotation in the chapter, but it kind of highlights this idea that there are expectations associated with either age or even gender, perhaps, in this interest. So it kind of presents the idea that because she's a girl, she probably wouldn't be able to play pool. And thankfully, Sadie's able to challenge those expectations here. And we see some more interaction between Sadie and Lockie. He gave her a wink and a smile. And this is kind of one of the first real interactions between these characters. From the chapters previous, at the football ground, I don't think Lockie even really had much awareness of Sadie. As the chapter continues, there's conversation about Sadie and her background and her mum. And then we have this line here from Lockie when they're talking about who has taught Sadie to play pool. And he states, yeah, and my dad probably taught her. A knowing laugh ran around the room. So again, we have this kind of drip feeding of information, and we can see that Sadie doesn't know what's going on. She's not aware of everything that the others, in this case children, I probably shouldn't refer to them as children, teenagers, are aware of. So it's foreshadowing, I suppose, in some ways, that this information will be revealed later. There's something about the connection between Lockie's father and Ellie that will be revealed later on. But it's unfair on Sadie that she's put in this situation where she just doesn't get it, she doesn't understand, and it doesn't appear that anyone's really going to explain it to her. Alright, let's move on to the later part in this chapter. Towards the end here. Sadie hesitated again. Do you want to go and look one day? At the lake, I mean? No, Ellie said firmly. No thanks. She propped her cheek on her hand and stared at Sadie. It's a spooky place, that lake, to tell you the truth. I never liked it. We can see two very different perspectives on this place. One is of interest and fascination, and Sadie really wants to go and explore this, whereas Ellie is very firm in her desire not to go back there again, and her justification is an unusual one, calling it spooky. There's obviously an element that is difficult to explain, some sort of supernatural element perhaps, that is causing her to dislike this place. So without realising it, Sadie's actually asked Ellie a very difficult question. And again, we will find out later in the text why this is so important. And this is a very typical feature of these mystery novels. You've got to remember the important details as you're reading through, because they often become relevant later on. And the closing section of this chapter here. Sadie kept her eyes on her plate. But she had to know if she dreamed the talking crow, if the stones with their mysterious markings were real. Whatever her mother said, she really already knew she had to go back. So this highlights just the inner turmoil that Sadie faces, this desire to know. And if she doesn't have that desire to know, well, she's not really going to fulfill her role as the person to unravel the mystery. And of course, we know she's going to do it in spite of what her mother tells her. Well, that about wraps it up for chapter 5. It's a pretty straightforward chapter, this one. It gets more confusing in the next few chapters as the story progresses in terms of its complexity in narrative order. I hope that helps. I'll see you for the next tutorial. This has been an ETV production brought to you by Prendeville Catholic College.